Hey everybody, welcome back. I am Professor Khalil Amani, and this is Khalil Amani's World 100. We're back for part 7 of the Jezebel series. Some of you might think I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm not. I'm just thorough with my conversation. I'm not a 2-minute brother. I'm a 65-year-old man, and I treat the Bible and my Bible lessons like I treat a woman in bed. Is that an analogy? Is that a good enough analogy for you? I said I treat these Bible series like I treat a woman in bed. I'm slow and methodical, and I build up to a crescendo, a climax, and an orgasm. I'm 65. I'm not 45 or 35 or 25, where I hit it and quit it. Where I go fast and 2 minutes later, pow, I'm done. That's for those other YouTubers who think they can teach Bible and they do one video on the subject and they say they covered it. Talking Bible is highly complex, and if you want to exhaust a subject and be comprehensive, it's always going to graduate as a series.
Every detail matters.
That's right, a straight series. A straight series. That's what separates the men from the boys, the women from the girls, the teachers from the wannabe. We real teachers. I say we're on part 7 of the Jezebel series. Because to understand this woman, you got to understand the culture, the environment, the history, the socio and political landscape of the day. As I've said, or let me say this first. This is part 7. If you want to understand this stuff about Jezebel, may I suggest that you start with part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Work your way up here. But if this is your first time watching me and watching this series, go ahead and enjoy this part, but then go back. Because I assure you one thing. 1 second. I assure you one thing. When you hear the word Jezebel, if anything comes negative to your mind when you hear it, then you are not healed of the curse of the religious and biblical damage that has been done to that woman. If you hear Jezebel and you think prostitute, slut, narcissist, strong-headed woman, wayward woman, skeezer, skank, slut, whore, any of those negative and derogatory words, if you think that when you hear the word Jezebel, you are not healed. You are a victim of Judeo-Christian brainwashing. And as I've said, think about this. This is a woman that lived 2,700 years ago. A woman born into royalty. A woman born with a silver spoon in her mouth. A woman born never understanding what it feels like to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without the jelly. A woman born never knowing what meal cramps are, when you're hungry and your stomach get the bubble guts because you're hungry. A woman born never having to warm up and boil top ramen noodles. A woman that never ate a syrup sandwich or a hot dog. She was born into royalty, raised as a princess 2,700 years ago. Lived in the king's mansion, the king's and queen's palace. Her daddy was a king. Her mother was a queen. She didn't go to public school. She had fancy schmancy tutors. Taught her the elements of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Smart as a whip. But on top of being smart, she was gorgeous. Jezebel was a dime piece. Jezebel was a looker. And the reason we know that is because an Israelite, a Jewish, a Hebrew king, having access to thousands, yea, millions of Israelite women, couldn't find a worthy Israelite woman in all of Israel. And he looked to Phoenicia to find a worthy partner, a worthy mate. And so he chose this Phoenician princess, virgin, never been touched by a man. 99.99999% of you men out there, you couldn't smell her used panties because she was royalty. She had guards and maids and butlers. They made sure that her virginity stayed as is, untapped. She was a virgin, a maiden, a princess. She had eunuchs. Those are men whose dicks don't work. Men who've had their balls or dicks cut off. That guarded her. And they guarded her virginity for the right man. And the right man was none other than another king. Imagine a woman of this caliber, a girl of this caliber, that 99.9% of the men on the earth couldn't even smell her dirty panties. 99.9% of the men on earth, they couldn't wipe her ass after she took a shit. She was that high up and grandiose and royal and regal. Yeah. Imagine that. Imagine that. But 2,700 years later, today, when we hear the name Jezebel, it's associated with whoredom, prostitution, narcissism, a woman who oversteps her bounds. They even created some bullshit called a Jezebel spirit. The late great Sanford and Son, that TV show in the 70s, his sister-in-law used to always go, "You old Jezebel." And we knew what she meant. She was calling a woman out of her name. For the name Jezebel has become synonymous with the worst of women. That's right. I said the name Jezebel has become synonymous with depravity and decadence and disrespect, licentiousness and lasciviousness. That's what the name has become. The name Jezebel is a code word for skank and skeezer, loose woman, woman of the night, woman of ill repute, streetwalker, hussy, slut, lowlife. Imagine that. Talk about a 180-degree change from a woman born of royalty as a princess. 180 degrees. How we see her today. We don't see her as a princess. We see her as a slut and a prostitute. And you can chalk up your understanding of your modern day view on Jezebel. You can chalk it up to your Judeo-Christian brainwashing. I know some of you like to say, if you're in a cult, cults brainwash people. So does Judaism. So does the Hebrew Israelites. So do the Israelites. And so do Christians. They have their own forms of brainwashing. And Jezebel is a classic example of this brainwashing. 2,700 years ago, 700 years before the birth of Jesus, a princess was born among the Phoenicians who knew not poverty, who knew not second-class citizenry, raised in royalty. And look at how we talk about her today. When preachers and teachers talk about Jezebel, rarely will you hear them say, oh, by the way, you know she was a princess. Oh, by the way, she was raised with a silver spoon in her mouth. Oh, by the way, she had the social etiquette of royalty. No, you don't hear that. They want to take you to the stories of the little things that she did that appeared to be wrong and negative. That's what they do. That's what they do. And so on this part 7, if you've been following and you already know the deal by now. You already know that she was a princess given to a king, made a queen, and right away and straightway and beat times, an Israelite king named Ahab switched allegiances, switched positions, switched his religion. That he put down the Yahweh religion, the Jehovah religion, the religion of the God of Israel. And he went and became a Baal worshiper and an Asherah worshiper. In the last part, we talked about the Asherah poles. We talked about the grove. That the grove is a symbol for the goddess Asherah. You don't learn this stuff in church, and you don't learn this stuff in Sunday school. And I don't know I'm sure there's some YouTubers out there, probably some white boys and some white girls that are teaching this truth. But among the so-called black conscious community, the Sonetta community, ain't nobody talking about this. Ain't nobody talking about this but me. Because religion is so male chauvinistic that whether you are a Christian, a Hebrew Israelite, or an Israelite, you're going to buy into the narrative that Jezebel was a wayward, floozy, whorish type of woman. That's what the Bible teaches. Because the Bible is a one-sided, ethnocentric piece of literature designed and created to place anybody who is not Israel in a subservient and second-class status. Oh yeah. And so I'm going to turn the music off because I want to get into this. And what we want to talk about on part 7 is this ideal known as paganism. Like Jezebel the queen, when you hear her name, you think negative and vile and disrespectful and demeaning things. Jezebel. So it is when we hear the word pagan or paganism. Jezebel would be considered a pagan, and pagans are considered anyone who is not of the Judeo-Christian or Islamic background. And we're going to do some definitions because there's a lot of people like to hold themselves mighty high. There are a lot of people that don't celebrate Christmas and Easter because they say it's a pagan holiday. As though paganism is a bad thing, is a wrong thing. So let me say this up front about even using the word pagan and paganism. Any of you out there that subscribe to a word like pagan or paganism, what you are telling those of us who study religion is this: that you are of the Judeo-Christian or Islamic mindset. For the people that you call pagan, they never refer to themselves as pagans. The word pagan is a Hebrew, is a Jewish, is an Israelite, is a Christian borrowed by the Islamic world. It is their word for people who don't subscribe to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Ishmael. That's all it is. And so like Jezebel, hearing the word Jezebel, thinking of disrespect, thinking of women that are whores, so it is with the word pagan and paganism. Whoever said paganism was bad or wrong, I'll tell you who said it was bad and wrong. The Bible, the Hebrews, the Jews, the Israelites, the Christians, and the Muslims. They are the ones who came up with this label, pagan and paganism. Those people that did not practice the religion of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Ishmael, they didn't create the word pagan. They didn't call themselves pagans. No more than those that were brought over here in the hulls of slave ships from the western shores of Africa via that peculiar institution. That's the euphemistic phrase, peculiar institution for American slavery. Those were Africans from Ghana, West Africa, Dahomey. Those were Africans of the Ashanti tribe and the Fulani and the Mandinka and many other tribes. That's who those people were that were captured and became prisoners of the American slave trade. But when they got here, it was the European that renamed and reclassified and put on the backs of the Mandinka and the Fulani and the Wolof and the Mandinka. They started calling them niggers and niggas and coloreds, porch monkeys and spirit checkers. And those are names that stuck. Then we became black and Afro-American and now African-American and black. But these names were heaped upon a people that were enslaved. And so there were people that were practicing religion as they understood it, including Jezebel and her mother and her father And before them, for thousands of years before the Israelites came on the world stage. And once the Israelite nation set up, and the Christians would come along, and the Muslim world also would come along, and they would name anybody that did not fall into the realm of the worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Ishmael. They would call them pagans. They would also call them heathens. When you hear the word pagan and when you hear the word heathen, those two words are synonymous with one another. Synonymous means they are the same. And so Jezebel was considered a pagan. Jezebel was considered a heathen. King Ahab, the king of Israel, he married a pagan. He married a heathen. You understand that? We're going to talk about the pagans / the heathens. But the first thing we should do is give a definition of what a pagan and a heathen is. So we will just go into something like the American Heritage Dictionary. Took off these glasses and put on these glasses. So let's go to the word pagan, first of all. And let's look up what a pagan, because a lot of you folks out there, you throw the word pagan out there like it's the most derogatory, negative thing that a person could be. Oh, I hear you. I don't celebrate Christmas or Easter because that's paganism. And you're right about that. But why is it such a bad thing? Why is paganism looked at like this? Let's go look at the word pagan and paganism. We're reading from the American Heritage Dictionary. It says this about pagan. Pagan, a person who is not a Christian, Muslim, or Jew. Heathen, one who has no religion. A non-Christian, see? And so the basic understanding that a pagan is a person who is not a Christian, a Muslim, or a Jew. And then you see the word heathen. Got it? So pagan and heathen are synonymous with one another. See right here? Not Christian, Muslim, or Jewish. Not religious, heathen. See? Let's see, is there paganism in here? Let's see if that word is in there. Paganize. No, they don't have a paganism. Okay. Well, it's down here, paganism. So, you got it? So now we understand that a pagan and paganism is a person who is not a Christian, Muslim, or Jew. So y'all thought it was just Christians and Jews and Christians. But even the Muslims are saying if you're not part of them, then you are considered a pagan. And we see in the same definition the word heathen. Let's go to the word heathen now. Go over to the word heathen. And in heathen it says, one who belongs to a tribe or nation that does not acknowledge the God of Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. See? So if you're not a Jew, an Israelite, a Christian, or a Muslim, you are considered a heathen, aka a pagan. Got it? It's right there. A heathen is somebody who does not acknowledge the God of Judaism, Yahweh, the God of Christianity, Jehovah, or the God of Islam, Allah. Got it? Okay. Working definition. Working definition. Now we understand. Now we understand. When we hear the word paganism, pagan, when we hear the word heathen, we're talking about somebody who doesn't believe in a Jewish or Israelite God, a Christian God, or a Muslim God. If you don't believe in the Jew God, the Christian God, or the Muslim God, you, my friend, are a pagan and a heathen. But I ask you this. What's wrong with being a pagan? And what's wrong with being a heathen? The only thing wrong with it is that how Christians and Jews and Muslims have made it a very negative words. If you are a Kemetic brother or sister, if you're into the Kemetic science, the Egyptian science, you are considered a pagan and a heathen. If you are into ancestor worship, as we did in West Africa, ancestor worship, animism, African tribal spirituality, you are considered a heathen and a pagan by American English definitions. That's a fact. We can put that away now. This is who the king of Israel married, a pagan. Jezebel was considered a pagan, not of her own doing, not of her own nation's doing. Again, the word pagan and heathen are names that the Israelites created to describe non-Israelites, Gentiles, foreigners. They created the phrase and they made it negative. That's right. And so it goes back to something that I showed you earlier, and I'm going to show you again. It goes back to our understanding of the Bible and those nations that are round about the Israelite nation. The Bible is a one-sided, slanted, and biased view of other nations. It is them that come up with nasty, derogatory, low-down, dirty words like heathen and pagan, and they stigmatize these words as though being a heathen and a pagan is a bad thing, and it's not. And it's not. You know what Jews and Israelites and Christians and Muslims, you know what it is when they call non-Jews and non-Christians and non-Israelites heathen and pagan? You know what it's like? It's like a child that grows up, looks at its parents now that they are grown and older, and maybe even more learned and wiser than their parents. They look back at Medea, Mama and them, Pop and Daddy and Abba. The children grow up and they look at their parents and they look them up and down like this. You niggas are backwards. That's what it's like when Judaism and Christianity and Islam look at paganism. You don't know? You don't know that paganism precedes the Abrahamic faiths? You didn't know that? You didn't know that heathens and pagans are the mothers and fathers of the Abrahamic faiths? You didn't know that? You didn't know that the pagans and the heathens are the progenitors and the eponymous mothers and fathers and ancestors of the Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam? You didn't know that paganism and heathenism is the mama and daddies of the Abrahamic religions. And now the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and all of its bastard children, Israelites and Catholics and all that stuff. They've grown up. They've grown up under the shadow of their paganistic mama and daddy. And now that they've grown up, learned a little bit more, they're looking down on their mamas and daddies. And they've made a title, pagan and heathen, and they've heaped every derogatory adjective they can think on these words. Oh, we're still talking about Jezebel, because Jezebel falls under the lineage of the so-called pagan, of the so-called heathen. It is the Bible's doing. It is the Bible's doing. Yeah. That's why we read in the history of God. Where's that at? That's why we read in a book like When God Was a Woman. We read in a book like When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone that our deception and our brainwashing on people like Jezebel, on people like the pagans, on people like the heathens, it's a skewed. It is a biased representation created by the Levites, by the Bible writers, to make you think that these foreigners, these outsiders, these Gentiles, that they were devoid of religion and true understanding of divinity and the deity. And so she would write about your brainwashing. She would write about why you feel like Jezebel is some slut and whore. Why you feel like paganism and heathenism is a bad thingy. Because your perspective, your outlook, your worldview is slanted and tainted because of the Bible. And she says it very succinctly in her book, When God Was a Woman, page 167. She says it. She tells you why you believe paganism is bad. Right here. It seems quite likely that the biblical Levite reports of the pagan religion in Canaan were presented from the point of view that was most advantageous and acceptable to the Levite theology rather than as a totally objective historical record. You got it? So what you think about paganism is the byproduct of the biblical Levite report. Yeah. You today in the 21st century, in the year 2025 and beyond, who look at pagans as bad and stupid and don't know what the hell's going on, you got that from some biblical Levites who wrote the Bible 3,000 years ago. And that point of view that was most advantageous and acceptable to the Levite theology rather than as a totally objective historical record. Objective is the key word. The Bible is not objective. The Bible is subjective. The Bible is a report about the Jews. The Bible is a report about other nations from a subjective historical record, not a objective historical record. Do you love that? I do this, people. Shout out to Merlin Stone. And so, the reason you believe in a Jezebel spirit, the reason you believe that Jezebel was a bad person, the reason you hear Jezebel and you go, oh my God, slut, prostitute, and whore, is because the Levites of the Old Testament wrote subjectively, not objectively. They wrote subjectively about history of themselves and the history of other foreign nations. That's what she was saying. And they were never going to put a positive spin on another nation. Oh no. Oh no. They put themselves up as God's chosen people. And they wrote in places like Amos, the 3rd chapter, that God only knew those people of all the nations of the earth. God only knew the Jews. You are a special people, a peculiar people, a chosen people, and motherfuck all other nations. I mean, just reading that alone. Just reading those type of ethnocentric and nationalistic scriptures alone should make you go, wait a minute. I'm not going to buy into the Bible's narrative without first inspecting the other nations. Let me see what they have to say about the God question. Because here you got the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites claiming that God only talks to them. And that salvation and divinity comes by way of the Abrahamic faiths. And then you got Jezebel. Did you know that Jezebel's religion is older than the Israelite religion? Oh yeah. I said Jezebel's religion is older than King Ahab's religion. And for that reason, and other reasons, when she married into the royal Israelite family, she didn't give up her religion. Because she looked at her religion as the mother and father of her king's religion. I said Jezebel was raised around royalty and educated with the finest of educators and teachers and scholars that tutored her. She wasn't no dumb Israelite woman. Because in Israelite society, women were basically second-class citizens, mentioned as the property of men in the 10 Commandments, with his house and his animals and shit. But in Phoenician society, where Jezebel was raised up and reared, women were equals. Women knew about the code of Hammurabi. They knew about the Sumero-Babylon code of Hammurabi, which was far more favorable to the lives of women. She was I am every woman when she became the queen of Israel. She had a whole different mindset than those Jew chicks. Those Israelite chicks. They were subservient. They were second class. They stood down and kept their fucking mouths closed when menfolk were talking. That's not where Jezebel came from. Jezebel came from one man, one vote, one woman, one vote society. She had the greatest of people to watch. She saw her mother, the queen of Phoenicia. She had great role models and great examples. She had examples of fatherhood, manhood, malehood, and kinghood in her father. She also had the great role model in her mother, models of motherhood, womanhood, royalhood, queenhood. That's who King Ahab married. That's who he married. And even though she was known as a pagan and a heathen, it didn't take on the negative connotation that it does today. To be a pagan and a heathen was not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, many of the Israelites were pagans and heathens themselves. Did you hear what I said? Many of the Hebrew Israelites, many of the Jews, many of the Israelites, they themselves were pagans and heathens, and they certainly tolerated paganism and heathenism. And for that information, we go to another source. We go to a book called The History of God by Karen Armstrong. And let me show you that paganism was tolerated and accepted amongst the so-called Israelites. You today got a problem with paganism, but that was not always the case. And so we go to Karen Armstrong's book, page 49. Page 49. Look what it says. Look what it says. I say we're reading from A History of God by Karen Armstrong, and she writes this. Today, we have become so familiar with the intolerance that has unfortunately been a characteristic of monotheism, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, that we may not appreciate that this hostility towards other gods was a new religious attitude. Here it goes. Paganism was an essentially tolerant faith. See? This is why we know it was a tolerant faith. This is why we know when Jezebel becomes the queen in Israel, as a pagan herself, she was a tolerant person. She wasn't trying to change the Israelite people into the worship of Baal and Asherah. That was a characteristic of monotheism. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That's their characteristic of trying to convert people to their particular brand of religion. But among the pagans and paganism, they were essentially a tolerant faith. That's right. Tolerant. You want to be a Jew? Be a Jew. Yeah. Yeah. You want to be a Jew? Be a Jew. And check this out about the Israelites. Check this out. Since most Israelites were devoted to Asherah, and some thought that she was Yahweh's wife, only the strictest Yahwists would have considered this blasphemous. You see? In other words, those ancient Israelites, ancient Jews, and ancient Hebrews, most of them were devoted to paganism as well. Asherah was the goddess of paganism. Asherah was the same god that King Ahab made a temple and worshipped. In the King James Bible, Asherah is known as a grove, Grove. And it says that King Ahab made a grove to Asherah. Made a idol to the grove, and the grove is Asherah. See? And some thought that Yahweh even had a wife, that the Israelite God had a wife, and his wife was Asherah. Only the strictest Israelites and Hebrews and Jews and Yahwists would have considered this blasphemous. Wow. This is the history that you don't get from, those Hebrew Israelites out there, the Captain Tazariots and all those Israelite folks that teach about Hebrew Israelites or Israelites. There was a period in their history when many, if not most, of the ancient Israelites believed that their God Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahuwah, Jehovah, Yahweh, many of them believed back in that day that the God of Israel, a male deity, and we know that the God of the Old Testament is a male deity when we have a book written by a Jew, Howard Ellsberg Schwartz, who wrote a book called God's Phallus. You know what a phallus is? A phallus is the male genitalia. A phallus is a penis, a hang low, a Johnson, a dick, a pecker. And here's a Jew boy who writes God's penis, God's phallus. So yes, God is represented in the Old Testament as a man. Daniel 7:9 talks about God in his anthropomorphic state. Anthropomorphic means in the form of a man, in the form of a human. And when God is described in Daniel 7:9, he is giving the attributes and the accoutrement of a goddamn male, of a man. He's got a beard. He's a man. And he's mentioned throughout the Old Testament, never as she, never as her, never as queen, never as goddess. The God of the Old Testament is always mentioned in male pronouns. He and him and father and God and creator, not creatress. So kill that spirit shit. And so, back in ancient times, the God of Israel was said, this male God, this masculine God was said to have a consort, a female deity, a wife, a creatress, a queen, and her name was Asherah. Archaeology has unearthed and dug up writings that talk about Yahweh and his Asherah. We're talking about paganism in Jezebel's time. And so I say to you people that the pagans aren't bad people, never were bad people, and that back in the ancient Israelite days, the so-called pagans were tolerated, were understood, and that many, if not most, of the Israelites, of the Jews, of the Hebrews, they were into some form of paganism. And the example, the best, clearest example to show that those Israelites of ancient times loved them some paganism. We need go no further than Jeremiah chapter 7. Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, today, you want to excoriate, you want to downplay, you want to thumb your nose up at pagans and paganism. But we read in the History of God by Karen Armstrong that paganism was tolerated and that most Jews and Israelites, they were into some sort of paganism themselves along with the Yahweh cult God. But look at you today. You say the word paganism with it tastes like shit in your mouth when you use the word pagan and paganism and heathens. But we have examples that the Israelites and that the Jews and the Hebrews were woefully invested in paganism. Jeremiah chapter 7. Here it is. They write about it in their own writings. They was sucking the phallus of paganism themselves. Yes, they were. Jeremiah chapter 7. There it is. And it says, this is the Israelites' worship of paganism and heathenism. Seest thou not what they do in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? Talking about the Jews. The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead their dough to make cakes to the Queen of heaven. Not to the King of heaven, not to the King of kings and the Lord of lords, but to the Queen, that's a woman. And that is, the Queen of heaven is none other than Asherah. That's right. The children gather wood, the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead their dough to make cakes for the Queen of heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. Look at the children of Israel, making their own God mad and angry. I said the Queen of heaven. In Canaan, the Queen of heaven was Asherah or Ashtaroth or Asarte. But the Queen of heaven goes back. The Queen of heaven goes back to Sumer, the Sumerians. In Sumer, the Queen of heaven was Inanna. Going back even further to Tiamat. But certainly Inanna was the Queen of heaven in Sumer. And when the Queen of heaven is introduced in the next civilization, known as the Babylonians, the Queen of heaven becomes Ishtar. And when the Queen of heaven is introduced in Egypt or Kemet, she is known as Isis or Aset. And then when she gets to Canaan, she becomes Asherah. And the Queen of heaven goes to the European nations, and she is known as Eostar, who becomes Easter. They are all the queens of heaven. And then when we get to Catholicism, they actually make the Virgin Mary the last queen of heaven. But the queen of heaven is a pagan goddess. And look at the children of Israel worshiping a pagan goddess, a heathen goddess. It was good enough for the ancients. Why isn't it good enough for you? Today, I said the queen of heaven was good enough for the ancient Jews, for the ancient Hebrews, for the ancient Israelites. Why is the queen of heaven and paganism and heathenism a bad thing today? Jeremiah chapter 44, same narrative. Jeremiah the 44th chapter. The Jews say, as for the word that thou hast spoken unto us Jews and Israelites in the name of the Lord, we will not hearken or listen unto thee, but we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth out of our own mouth to burn incense unto the queen of heaven, Asherah, the paganist god, the pagan goddess, and the heathen goddess. We will burn unto the queen of heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers and our kings and our princes in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of victuals or food, and were well, and saw no evil. See, we didn't see no evil in worshiping a pagan goddess, a pagan deity, a pagan creatress, a female goddess. We didn't see no evil in it. But look at you niggas today. You say pagan and heathen with utter disdain. But since we left off to burn incense to the queen of heaven, Asherah, the female deity and female goddess, the heathen and the pagan goddess, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we have wanted all things, and we have consumed by the sword and by the famine. And when we burn incense to the queen of heaven and poured out drink offerings unto her. See, it just goes on. Now you want to know who the queen of heaven is? Real quickly, we give them props to the pagans on this one, because Jezebel was a pagan. You want to know who the queen of heaven is? Let's go over to the dictionary. Everything can be cross-referenced. OPQ. Let's go over to, and let's look at it. QRS. QR. Here we go. Okay. You want to know who the queen of heaven? You want to know when Jeremiah chapter 7 and Jeremiah 44 talks about this pagan, this heathen goddess that the Israelites were consumed with, that the Israelites were baking cake, had the children out in the woods gathering wood, brought it back, and then the fathers were making big ass ovens and stoves and burning the wood, and the women were in the kitchen kneading and fixing their dough so they can make cakes for this queen of heaven. You want to know who this pagan heathen goddess was? The goddess that Jezebel would bring from Phoenicia. Here she go. We need look no further than the Ehrman's Bible Dictionary. They have an entry, Queen of Heaven. a fertility, a fucking deity worshipped by the people of Judah in disobedience to the commandments of God. See? Women, Israelite women, Jewish women, Hebrew women in particular seem to have been involved in veneration of the Queen of Heaven, offering cakes and libations, alcohol, and burning incense. But men and children participated as well. But what's the Queen of Heaven's name? The Queen of Heaven can be related to a number of ancient Near Eastern deities. Just like I told you, in the Near East, in Sumer, she was Inanna. In Babylon, she was Ishtar. In Egypt, she was Isis or Set. She had many names in the ancient Near East of a female deities. But the clearest connection is the Assyrian Ishtar. See, Ishtar takes you back to Babylon. So the Queen of Heaven in Babylon or amongst the Assyrians, she was known as Ishtar. But let's go down. Let's go down. Here it is. But even so, it may have coincided. Oh, I passed it up. Worship of the Ishtar may have been introduced into Judah as Asherah. See? The Queen of Heaven, as practiced by Jezebel, was introduced. Her name was Asherah. Asherah, Ishtar, Inanna, Isis, they're all known as the Queen of Heaven. Got it? And so, today, the 21st century, My, how we love to denigrate and disrespect pagans. My, how we thumb our nose up at paganism. My, how we love to act like we know some shit about history and talk about Christmas being pagan, Easter being pagan. We try to kick science like the pagans were bad people. They weren't a bad people. And the pagans gave us the Abrahamic faiths, and the pagans were the eponymous ancestors of the Abrahamic faiths, and the pagans are the mothers and fathers of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so while the dictionaries define paganism and heathenism as religions that don't conform to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, who gives a shit? What the definition of paganism and heathenism doesn't tell you is that those same pagans and those same heathens are the mothers and fathers of the non-pagans. And so we're going to read now from a wonderful, wonderful book. A great book by a great historian and theologian and philosopher. His name was Gerald Massey. And he wrote a few books, but the book I'm quoting from is Gerald Massey's Lectures. Gerald Massey's Lectures. Oh, it's got a long subtitle. The Cosmic Religion, the Seven Souls of Man and their culmination in the Christ, the Devil of Darkness or Evil in the Light of Evolution, Luminatry, ancient and modern, Gnostic and historical Christianity, man in search of his soul during 50,000 years and how he found it. But Brother Gerald Massey hits the nail on the head with his commentary that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all of their ideals, their archetypes, all of their motifs, their savior sons, their dying and rising gods, their trinities and triumphs, their three-in-one deities, all of that came from the so-called pagans, from the so-called heathens. And he goes on to say that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they stole their ideals from the pagans. Let's read it. Let's read it. Notice this is like the fifth book I've shown you. I read from the dictionary. Notice what I do. Unlike a lot of Bible teachers and people that want to talk Bible, notice what I've done so far. I've quoted from the Bible. That's one book. I quoted from the dictionary. That's two books. I quoted from a Bible dictionary. That's three books. I quoted from Merlin Stone, When God Was a Woman. That's four books. I quoted from A History of God. That's five books. I showed you that God has a penis. God has a phallus. That's six books. And now the seventh book in this hour and change. Who does that? Who you know does that. These Bible teachers, they come on and it's all them. It's just an hour or 2 hours of them. They don't bring nobody to back up what the fuck they're saying. But now let's close out with Gerald Massey letting us know that it is Judaism and Christianity and Islam who are the real thieves, the real plagiarists. That Judaism and Christianity and Islam, they got their 5-finger discount on. You know what 5-finger discount? That means you're a thief. You be stealing stuff. Just like that stupid black woman on YouTube that goes over and steals people's videos and put them on her channel and calls it her content. Let's go look and see what he has to say about that. Massey, page 112. Page 112. I don't think that's it. No, it's in the back. Ah, here it is. Page 261. Here it is. I said we're reading from Gerald Massey's lectures. All right. Look what he has to say about you Jews and Christians and Muslims. While you talking about the pagans. It starts right here. These people have a vision of their own, and as it was bequeathed to them, when it says these people, we're talking about Judeo-Christian and Muslims. Jews, Christians, and Muslims. What we call Judeo-Christian religion. He writes, these Jews, Christians, and Muslims, these people have a vision of their own. And as it was bequeathed to them, they will not depart with it, even though they have to close their eyes to see. Damn. How you close your eyes to see? They will die in the good old faith, But that is what others of us cannot do. See, they're talking about real truth seekers. We, the real truth seekers, we're not trying to die. We're not trying to, what does it say? We're not trying to close our eyes to see. That's for you folks who have bought into organized religion. You have closed your eyes so you can see. And you folks who are Jews and Christians and Muslims and Israelites, y'all will die in the good old faith. But that is what others of us, we the real truth seekers, we cannot do. We have but just begun to ascertain the meaning of the good old facts that preceded the good old faith. We are finding out that names the most hallowed or holy are spurious counterfeits of the ancient gods. Goddamn. We are learning that the literary fortunes of the Bible were made by mythology and filched from the peoples who have been spoiled as pagans and accursed as the spawn of Satan. Goddamn. Whew. Let me just read that without me talking. These people have a vision of their own, and as it was bequeathed to them, they will not part with it, even though they have to close their eyes to see. They will not, they will die in the good old faith. But that is what others of us cannot do. We have but just begun to ascertain the meaning of the good old facts that preceded the good old faith. We are finding out that names the most hallowed are spurious counterfeits of the ancient gods. We are learning that the literary fortunes of the Bible were made by mythology and filched from the people who have been spoiled as pagans and the accursed as the spawns of Satan. Whew. I know a lot of y'all just goes right over your head. Let me break it down for you as we close. Let me break it down as we close. Jews, Christians, and Muslims, Hebrew Israelites, people who have bought into some form of organized religion. These people, you have a vision of their own, of your own. And as it was bequeathed or given to them, to you, you will not part with it. You're not going to give up being a Jew, a Muslim, or a Christian. You're not going to part with it. You're not going to part with being a Hebrew Israelite or an Israelite. The Abrahamic faiths is what he's talking about. You're not going to part with it. Even though you all have to close your eyes to see. What a fucking religious metaphor if I ever heard one. You got to close your eyes to see. What does it mean when Gerald Massey says these Christian Jews and Muslims and Israelites, they have to close their eyes to see? What it means is when they close their eyes, they can remain blinded by that which they believe, being a Jew, a Muslim, or a Christian. As long as your eyes are closed to the truth, you can believe what you want to believe because you refuse to look deeper. So just close your eyes and believe is what he said. You close your eyes so that you can see. Woo! These Jews, Muslims, and Christians, they will die in the good old faith. You know, the good old faith, that which precedes you, that which was created and set up before you were born. That's the good old faith. You didn't have to learn it or work at it or dig it up. It was already prepared for you from the beginning of your existence. When you came up, your mammy and your poppy, they taught you about the good old faith. That's what he's talking about. And you're going to die in the good old faith. You're going to die as a Judeo-Christian Muslim believer. That's the good old faith. But that is what others of us, myself, cannot do. I'm a truth seeker. I can't allow men to tell me about my salvific opportunity. I can't allow men to tell me about that which none of us know. The other side. Yeah. Those of us, the truth seekers, the real truth seekers, we have but just begun to ascertain the meaning of the good old facts which precede, which come before, which are the origin of the good old faith. In other words, there were good old facts that came before the good old faith. The good old facts were the heathens. The good old facts were the pagans. And the good old facts, the heathens and the pagans, they came before the good old faith. Those Judeo-Christian religions that were set up based on the foundation of paganism and heathenism. That's what he's getting to. We have but just begun to ascertain the meaning of the good old facts, paganism and heathenism that preceded the good old faith, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. We are finding out that the names Yahweh and Jehovah and Allah, that most hallowed or holy names, they are nothing but spurious counterfeits of the ancient gods. God damn. I said Jehovah, Yahweh, Jesus, and Allah, they are nothing but spurious counterfeits. This is what Jezebel came to reveal and show these fuck niggas. We are your mothers and fathers. We are the beginners, the progenitors and the originators of your Israelite tradition. I'm watching my time here. The names of these gods that are hallowed. The word hallowed means holy. You know, hallowed be thy name in the Bible. We are finding out that names today, most hallowed, most holy, Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahuwah, Yahweh. We are finding out Allah. We are finding out the names today that are most hallowed, they are no more than spurious. The book says they are no more than spurious counterfeits of the ancient gods, of the pagans and the heathens. Goddamn. Come on, Gerald Massey. Come on, Gerald Massey. He goes on to say, we are also learning that the literary fortunes of the Bible, I'm only going to King James. I'm a King James man. But the literary fortunes of the Bible were made by mythology, not history, not historicity. Subjective mythology. And that mythology goes back to the pagans and the heathens. And so the Bible is not a book of real historicity, it's a book of mythology. And it goes on to say, the literary fortunes of the Bible were made by mythology and filched. You know what the word filched means? The word filch means that you stole it. All of your stories, as I said, your Trinity stories, your 3-in-1 stories go back to Egypt. Osiris, Iris, and Horus was the first Trinity or the first triune. It wasn't the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That was filched. That's a mythological Christian invention based on Kemetic thought. He goes on to say that your ideals in the Bible, your mythological stealing in the Bible, that you filched it. He tells you who it came from. You stole, you filched it. You plagiarized your Bible mythology. You got it from the peoples who have been spoiled as pagans and accursed as the spawns of Satan. This is why today you say paganism and you say devil. This is why today you say paganism and you say accursed. You say paganism and you say heathen. You say paganism and you say any nasty, negative, deplorable name. Because you want to hide the fact that it was these same so-called accursed pagans and heathens that gave you your motherfucking religion. And these people that gave us Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we get it from Jezebel's religion. Jezebel's religion is older than the Israelite religion. Jezebel's faith and religion precedes the Israelite tradition and the Israelite God Yahweh. Jezebel's religion is older than the Israelite religion. And with that, I hope you all are learning. This is the end of part 7. I love you all for a better world. Peace.